Okay, so let's look at the history. Right, just let's do something here. World War One. Well, this is the first time we see this thing called industrialized warfare. Now, it's really important that we get our head around this idea of industrialization. What industrialization means is machinery, engineering, logic, things that science, things that were all used to create something in World War One. We notice first, before we go any further, just the impact of World War One. You might know this, you might not, but there's a lot of dead people when it comes to World War One, and you can see here from this image we've got just a horrific image from the trenches. This is just a mass grave where they're removing these bodies that are in the trenches, and you can just see how they're piled up. This is something that you need to be very aware of. World War One resulted in mass death across the board. If you look just at some of these figures, in Russia, about 12 million men were mobilized to take part in the war, and of those 12 million men, 1.7 million of them ended up dead. Another 4.9, almost 5 million men ended up wounded, and then another 2.5 million missing. That's just from the Russian nation. That's about almost 80% of those that were mobilized, of the 12 million that were mobilized, almost 80%, 75% roughly, were ended up either injured or killed. So quite stark figures. If you look at Great Britain and the British Empire as well, about 9 million people mobilized, about 900,000, so 10%, well over 10% of the of those people that were mobilized ended up dead. 2 million wounded, so about 35% of those people who went off, those men that went off to war, came back damaged or didn't come back at all. So just something to bear in mind. Hundreds of thousands and millions of men actually killed in the war. So something that should be very, very just disturbing. And the people who were alive at the time looked at this, and obviously they're going to have a reaction to it in some way. If we look at the other side, you can see 11 million men were called up to the front from Germany. 1.7 of them were killed. 1.7 million of them were killed, and 4.2 million were injured. So huge numbers. 65 million people involved in the war, and 8.5 million people died in the war. That's something we can't get away from. Huge sacrifice of life. And what this meant, well, how did they die? Let's get there firstly. They died. No one had ever been killed on this kind of scale before in the whole of human history. And the reason why they died en masse was because of this idea of industrialized warfare. No longer did it require men to have bayonets or just rifles to shoot and kill people, but now they were able to kill people on a whole nother scale. What it meant was that things like gas was used, and gas, although it wasn't supposedly meant to kill people, it ended up killing thousands upon thousands of people, because and the effect of it was just horrific. People coming out in boils on their skin, choking. Obviously, you've probably in English read quite a few poems about the nature of gas being used to the front. So just mass slaughter. Aeroplanes as well being used for the first time, I think during World War One, and these again were machines that were designed specifically. Well, maybe not so much in the idea of the aeroplane, but they were designed and used in order to drop bombs and then to kill people. The Sopwith Camel, not that I know of, was used to drop bombs, but they were. And this just came about further. Tanks being used at the front, again, actively used to destroy people. The machine gun as well, for the first or second time, being used in modern warfare. And this also meant the mass slaughter of millions upon millions of men. And as we can see here, let's just pause that for a second. The result of some of this warfare with big guns being used all the time was this idea of shell shock. And shell shock was a state. I'm going to play this video for you in a second. Shell shock was something that was suffered by men who were at the front, and day after day after day they suffered the bombing and the noise of the bombing and the constant threat of death was suffered by them, and they eventually broke mentally, and so that they were actually ended up in a very, very delicate space. So let's just watch what happened to them. I'm going to pause this midway through and we'll move on to the next thing, but just so you get an idea of how bad it was.
Some patients felt compelled to go hide themselves at the mere mention of the word bomb. Some veterans even felt terror grip them whenever they saw the uniform. Tens of thousands of soldiers also lost one or more limbs in this war.
Okay, you get the general idea. Very, very horrific. The important thing here is industrialized warfare. So, let's start with the Dadists. Well, the Dadists are around in Zurich during World War One, and they're a bit annoyed by what they see during World War One, to say the least. Very, very angry is what they are. Now, they see the reason for the war as being completely absurd. They blame it on this group of people, we call the bourgeoisie, which roughly translates as middle class, but the way you should really think about it is those people who are in charge of government, but are actually the people who have they're merchants, they earn money, but they own factories. That's how they would go about things. So they're a bit different from the aristocracy, which would just be landed, would just have land. They would actually own factories and things like that, but they also have power. Now, the Dadists see the bourgeoisie as being responsible for World War One. I've got this picture of Stephen Fry here, who played a character in Blackadder Goes Forth, and he is this hapless master of the army, and he just sends people out en masse to go and be slaughtered. And that's how the Dadaists saw the bourgeoisie, saw the leaders, and they thought this was completely incomprehensible, totally wrong. So they believed the reason and the logic of the bourgeois capitalist society had led people into the war. Now, unfortunately, I was going to play a short clip here from Blackadder Goes Forth, but unfortunately it's been removed from YouTube, so I can't do that. But the idea that you should get is that these people, or the Dadists, saw them as being completely hackless and completely absurdly focused on winning the war, but without any thought as to how. And they were very, very angry about this situation. So they connected. Well, the Dadaists are artists. So you've got to understand that what they did was they connected the rules of the bourgeois and what the bourgeois regarded art to be with the bourgeois society as a whole. So they used art to basically challenge the bourgeoisie, and they thought, well, if the bourgeois think that this particular thing is art, then we're going to confront them on that, and we're going to try and annoy them and frustrate them. Now remember, these people are artists. They regard art as being an incredibly important part of culture and of society, and art is well, they think, a way of changing the world. So when they link the bourgeois idea of art, the bourgeois look at something like the Mona Lisa and they think, oh, that's an amazing piece of art. What the bourgeois or the Dadaists do is they say, well, if the bourgeois think that that's a brilliant piece of art, what we're going to do is we're going to totally ruin that for them. This idea of classical, beautiful, tasteful art, we're going to shock them. And we see this idea of shock taking place quite a bit. Now, these are some later pictures. These aren't Dadaist pictures at all, or sculpture. But these are just later on artists have always used shock. This is a piece of work, I think it's by an artist called Chris Olalifi, who basically suspended a crucifix in his own urine, which obviously was very shocking. Damien Hirst pickled a shark in formaldehyde, and this again was something that was done to shock. These are much later pieces. Dadists did this. They went along, and one particular artist called Marcel Duchamp, he took a urinal, an actual urinal, he put it on its side, and he wrote the words "Art Mat" on the side and wrote down 1917. And he entered this into a bourgeois exhibition of art. And what he was basically trying to do was he was trying to frustrate them, he's trying to annoy them, trying to outrage them, trying to get them very angry by saying, well, you think that that's art, well, I disagree with you completely. In fact, this is what I think is art. And he used the urinal specifically to do that. It's very anti-art, and that's the way we should think about it. But why did they do this? Well, if we take a look at the Mona Lisa, the bourgeois think that this is classical, beautiful, tasteful, right? He is doing things just to shock them. So he takes that piece of work and he actually does this. Marcel Duchamp, this is the same chap who put the urinal into the exhibition, and he does this. He reproduces the Mona Lisa on postcards. He draws a little moustache on her face and a little beard. And he writes the letters LHOOQ, which in French, I could be wrong, but I think in French, if you just say the letters out, like I'm saying LH, if you say that in French, what that translates as, or sounds like, is, I think, she is hot in the arse, which is a direct affront to any idea of the Mona Lisa being this classical, tasteful, beautiful, elitist piece of art. He's basically just sticking two fingers up at her and saying, at that idea, and saying, well, no, I'm going to ridicule it. I'm going to laugh at it because of your idea about World War I and your logic, and you people just make me sick, basically, is what he's doing. It's this idea of anti-art. He's very, very anti the whole idea of art being this highbrow pursuit, because the people who thought that it was a highbrow pursuit were the people who were ultimately responsible for things like World War I, and he saw that was absolutely shocking.